The clan elder's decree arrived at Samuel Whitaker's orchard at dawn, nailed to the gatepost with an iron spike, written in the border tongue that both humans and orcs had used for 3 generations of uneasy treaty. He read it twice, standing in the dewy grass in his boots and nothing else, the morning cold raising gooseflesh on his bare arms, and then he read it a 3rd time because the first 2 readings had not made it any less absurd. By order of Clan Ironhide and the Border Accord of the Greywood, in recognition of the land dispute settled in the 5th year of the truce, a marital bond is hereby arranged between Shagrol Ironhide, daughter of the late warchief Bogdan Ironhide, and Samuel Whitaker, holder of the Southern Orchard Grant. Both parties are summoned to Greywood Crossing within 7 days to acknowledge the arrangement before a border witness. Failure to appear constitutes a breach of the accord and forfeits all land claims held under treaty protection. Samuel set the notice down on the gatepost and looked out at his apple trees. They were old trees, heavy with fruit, and he had spent 2 years coaxing them back from the neglect of whoever had owned the land before the border wars burned everything south of the Greywood to ash. He had planted 50 new saplings in the lower meadow himself, hauling water from the creek in the early mornings before the heat built, and he had built the stone fence along the eastern edge with his own hands, stone by stone, which had taken most of one autumn. He had done all of it to stop being the man he had been, a sellsword who took work where he found it and slept in other people's barns. He did not want to lose this orchard. He also, with tremendous certainty, did not want to be anyone's arranged husband. He folded the notice and put it in his coat pocket and went inside to make his breakfast, and he thought very hard about what a man could reasonably do when an orc clan had decided he was going to marry one of their own. The answer, he found, was not much. The Greywood Crossing was a 2-day ride north, where the forest thinned and the old stone bridge crossed the river that marked the unofficial line between human-held Grant land and the deep territory the Ironhide clan had claimed since before anyone's grandfather was born. Samuel had been through it twice, once when he first came looking at the land, and once when the clan's boundary riders had stopped him on the road to inform him, with significant politeness masking significant menace, that the eastern quarter of his orchard technically sat on disputed ground and he would be wise to negotiate. He had negotiated. He had paid a tithe of 3 barrels of apple cider per season to the clan's storehouse, and in return they had left him and his trees alone, and he had considered that a fair bargain. He had not considered that the bargain might also include himself as a person. He rode north on the morning of the 2nd day, his horse picking the way through the Greywood's edge where the oaks grew so thick the light came in broken and green. The forest had a smell to it. He had always liked wet stone and pine resin, and something older underneath, the earthy breath of a place that had been old when humans first came to this country. He carried his sword on his hip out of habit, though he had not drawn it for anything other than cutting rope in 2 years. His hands were calloused now from pruning shears and stone laying, not from the hilt of a blade, and he noticed the difference sometimes when he gripped the reins. He was 31 years old. He was not a remarkable man by any measure. He had brown hair that needed cutting, a jaw that bore the ghost of a beard he kept half-trimmed because it itched, and a lean, rangy build that spoke to a life of physical work rather than any particular gift for it. He had gray eyes that people sometimes called kind and sometimes called watchful, depending on how they felt about him. He had no family living. He had a handful of acquaintances in the small market town of Varro, a day south of the orchard, who liked him well enough but would not call themselves his friends with any great conviction. He had his trees. He had the way the light fell across the lower meadow in the late afternoon. He had the satisfaction of a thing he had built himself slowly, with real effort. He arrived at Greywood Crossing mid-morning, and found it considerably more populated than he had expected. The crossing was a cleared space around the old bridge, a wide flat area of hard-packed earth that served as a market ground when both sides were being friendly. Someone had erected a series of posts with clan banners in green and iron gray, the Ironhide colors, and a crowd had gathered. Not a vast crowd, but significant, perhaps 60 or 70 people, a mix of human border settlers and orc clan members, ringed around a central space as though watching something. Samuel tied his horse at the post near the tree line and pushed through the edge of the crowd, and then stopped. In the center of the clearing, a large orc man was sitting in the dirt. He was a very large orc man. He was 6.5 feet tall if he was an inch, broad through the shoulders as a draft horse, with the particular build of someone who had spent decades in serious physical conflict. He was sitting in the dirt because he had very recently been put there by the woman standing over him, who was breathing through her nose with an expression of such composed disdain that it was almost beautiful. Samuel had never seen Shagrol Ironhide before, but he knew immediately that it was her, because the banner at the nearest post bore the Ironhide name, and because no one else in the clearing was standing with that particular weight of ownership over the man she had just dropped. She was dressed in close-fitted warrior's leathers of dark green and brown, the kind that had been stitched to the body rather than thrown on. The bodice laced tight from waist to collarbone, the leggings tucked into knee-high boots with iron buckles at the calf. Her arms were bare from the shoulder, and they were the arms of someone who had spent considerable time in genuine danger, ringed with muscle and marked with scars in the pale silvery way that orc skin healed from deep cuts. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, and built with the kind of powerful, precise grace that made you think not of blunt force, but of something more like a bow at full draw, all of it controlled, none of it wasted. Her skin was the deep sage green of old forest moss, and her black hair was pulled back from her face in a thick braid threaded through with a single iron ring. Her tusks were modest and slightly upswept, her jaw strong, her dark eyes currently fixed on the man she had put in the dirt with an expression that communicated, clearly and without drama, that she found the situation tedious. The large orc man on the ground was saying something in the clan tongue. She answered him in 3 words that made the nearest orc spectators wince. Then she looked up. Across the cleared space, across 60 people and the noise of the crowd, her gaze found Samuel with the flat precision of someone who had been waiting for him. He did not know how she recognized him. He did not know why the eye contact hit him like a step off a ledge he had not seen coming. He stood and met her gaze and did not look away, because he had learned a long time ago that looking away first in a situation like this was always a mistake. A man in a gray coat, a border witness, Samuel recognized the silver chain of office, stepped forward and spoke loudly in the border tongue. The parties to the accord arrangement are called forward. Samuel Whitaker of the Southern Orchard, Shagrol Ironhide of Clan Ironhide, please come to center. Samuel came to center. Shagrol Ironhide looked at the witness, then at Samuel, then back at the witness, and said in the border tongue with the accent of someone who had spoken it since childhood, "I have not agreed to this." Her voice was low and carrying. It was not a shout. It did not need to be. The clan elder has agreed on your behalf, as is permitted under the accord's kinship provisions, the witness said, in the tone of someone who was very tired of this conversation and had been having it for several days already. "The clan elder," she said, "is my uncle, and he agreed on my behalf because I would not agree on my own behalf, and he has chosen to interpret the accord's kinship provisions in the most self-serving way possible, because this arrangement grants Clan Ironhide continued access to the river road without negotiating through the Human Border Council, which he does not want to do." She said all of this with perfect calm, as though she were describing the weather. "The man standing next to you did not agree to this either. I can see it in his face." Samuel said, "She's right. I didn't agree to it." The witness looked at him with the particular expression of a man who is dealing with 2 uncooperative parties and has run out of patience for them both. Under the accord, the arrangement is binding unless both parties formally refuse before a full clan gathering and the human border council simultaneously, which would require 30 days, Shagrol said. I know, I read the accord. She looked at Samuel again. Did you read the accord? I received a copy this morning, he said. I didn't have time to read all of it. Something moved in her expression, not a smile. Something adjacent to a smile, wry and brief as a bird crossing a window. The short version is that my uncle has us tied up in treaty language for 30 days unless we manage to file a joint refusal before the Border Council, which requires us to travel to Varro together, which he has also made complicated by arranging for my escort to be his most loyal riders, who will not take me south without his blessing. She tilted her head slightly. However, Samuel repeated, I am not without resources. She glanced sideways at the large orc man who was, at this point, getting himself to his feet with somewhat injured dignity. Goran was supposed to be one of those loyal riders. He is no longer in a position to report my movements, because he made the error of suggesting that I should accept this arrangement gracefully, and I explained my disagreement. With your fists, Samuel said. With my elbow, she said, with the precision of someone who finds accuracy important. Are you opposed to traveling to Varro? He thought about it. He thought about his orchard and the land claim and 30 days of being legally bound to a woman he had met 4 minutes ago. He thought about the way she had looked at him across the crowd, flat and direct and utterly without pretense, and the way she had said, I have not agreed to this, in the tone of someone who has never agreed to anything she did not choose. I'm not opposed, he said. Good, she said. We should leave before my uncle's other riders arrive. They will be here within the hour. The witness made a sound of professional distress. Shagrol picked up a travel pack from beside the nearest post, slung it over one shoulder and walked toward the tree line without looking back. Samuel looked at the witness. The witness looked at Samuel. Samuel turned and followed her. He caught up with her at the horses. She had her own, a large black mare with the clan mark braided into her mane tied at the same post as his brown gelding, which suggested she had planned this sequence of events with some care. You had this figured out before I arrived, he said. I had several possibilities figured out, she said, checking the mare's girth strap with the practiced efficiency of someone who trusts no one else to do it correctly. You arriving on time was one of them. You not arriving, or arriving and immediately agreeing to the arrangement, were others. I had contingencies. What was the contingency if I'd agreed to the arrangement? She paused. She looked at him sidelong, and again there was that not quite smile. I would have handled it differently, she said, which was not an answer, and was also somehow entirely complete. They rode south through the Greywood edge in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised him. He had spent 2 years in near solitude and had grown used to quiet, but this was a different kind, not empty but occupied. 2 people moving through the same space with a mutual understanding that words were not required yet. The morning light came through the trees and striped the road in gold and shadow, and the birds were loud overhead. Shagrol rode with her back straight and her eyes moving across the tree line with the constant low-level alertness of someone who has spent a great deal of time in places where threats come from unexpected directions. After perhaps an hour, she said, You were a soldier. Sellsword, he said. There's a difference. The difference being that a soldier serves someone and a sellsword serves whoever is paying that week. That's a harsh way to put it. I'd say the difference is that a soldier has orders and a sellsword has a contract. And the contract ended. The last one ended 4 years ago at the Thornfield campaign. I decided not to take another one. He paused. I'd had enough of it. She was quiet for a moment, watching the trees. My father died at Thornfield, she said, without particular inflection. He was warchief Bogdan. He led the clan's warband in the 3rd engagement. Samuel thought about Thornfield, the smoke and the mud, and the 3 days of fighting that had decided exactly nothing except how many people on both sides were dead. He had been on the human side. He had no way of knowing if he and Bogdan Ironhide had ever been in the same section of the field. He found he did not want to say so, because it was the kind of thing that either mattered enormously or did not matter at all, and he had no way yet of knowing which it was for her. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it without qualification. She glanced at him. Whatever she saw, she seemed to find acceptable. He was a good warchief, she said. He was a less accomplished father, but he tried. She rolled one shoulder in a small movement that was not quite a shrug. "My uncle took charge of the clan after the truce. He has different priorities." "The river road," Samuel said. "The river road," she confirmed. "And a dozen other agreements he would like the clan to benefit from without having to negotiate through the border council. Marrying me to a human landholder gives him a proxy." She said it without bitterness, just plainly as a fact she had long since made her peace with. "I am useful to him in that way." "Is that the only reason you want to refuse? The proxy business?" She was quiet for longer this time, long enough that he thought she was not going to answer. "I have refused every arrangement my uncle has proposed," she said finally. "There have been 3, all within the clan, all to men who wanted the Ironhide name more than they wanted me. I know what it is to be wanted for what you represent rather than who you are." She kept her eyes on the road. "I have no particular desire to repeat the experience with a human who didn't know my name before this morning." "That's fair," he said. She looked at him then briefly with something that might have been surprise. "What?" he said. "Most men argue," she said. "You're not wrong," he said. "I didn't know your name before this morning. I had no intention of getting married to anyone. I came to Greywood Crossing to refuse the arrangement and preserve my land claim, which I am now doing by riding south with you." He met her gaze for a moment. "I'm not going to pretend that's a great foundation for a marriage." "No," she said. And then very quietly, "It is, however, a reasonable foundation for an alliance." They rode in silence for another mile. The trees thinned and the sky opened up, and Samuel could see his orchard in the distance, the dark shapes of the apple trees in their rows, the stone fence along the eastern edge catching the midday light. "We should stop at my place," he said. "Get supplies for the Varro Road. It's 2 days south and I don't know how much you've packed." "I packed for 3 days," she said. "Then we should stop anyway because I need to leave word with my neighbor that the trees need checking if I'm gone more than a week." He paused. "And because you should eat something. You dropped a man twice your weight on his back this morning, and that kind of thing takes fuel." She turned to look at him fully for the first time on the road, and whatever arrangement her face was making, it was genuine and entirely unguarded for just one moment before she gathered it back. "You are a strange man, Samuel Whitaker," she said. "I've been told," he said. "Come see the orchard." He had not brought anyone to the orchard since he built the place, not because he was precious about it, but because there had not been anyone to bring. He watched Shagrol ride through the gate and down the lane between the apple trees and felt something he had no clean name for, a kind of double vision, seeing the place as it was and also as it might look to someone seeing it for the first time. She dismounted at the stone fence and walked along it slowly, running one hand over the top course of stones. Her touch was not gentle exactly. It was considered, the same way she had checked the mare's girth strap. As though she were learning the thing rather than decorating it. "You laid this," she said. It was not a question. Most of it, the eastern corner, was already standing from before the border wars. "How long did it take?" "1 autumn. About 4 months, working the mornings before the heat." She walked the fence for another 20 feet, her hand still trailing along the stones, and Samuel stood by his horse and watched her, and did not try to fill the silence with anything because she was thinking, and he had learned to respect that in a person. "It's good work," she said. Something in him warmed at that in a way he would have been embarrassed to examine too closely. They ate at the small table in his kitchen bread and hard cheese, and the last of a pot of bean soup he had made 2 days prior, reheated over the fire. She ate without ceremony, which he appreciated. He had known people who made a whole performance out of eating at someone else's table, and she was not one of them. She ate like someone who understood that food was important and should be taken seriously, and when she was done, she picked up both bowls without being asked and set them in the water basin by the door. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. He wrote a note for his neighbor Aldrich, who farmed the land half a mile east and owed Samuel 2 favors. He left it at the stone gate on their way back to the road. Then they were moving south again, the Greywood forest rising on their left and the open rolling country of the frontier spreading on their right, and Samuel felt with a strange clarity that something had shifted. Not settled, not resolved, but shifted, as though the morning had been one kind of day and now it was another. They camped that night at the old way station south of the forest's edge, a roofed shelter of weathered timber with a fire ring and a well, maintained by the Border Council for travelers on the Varro Road. Shagrol took the first watch without discussion, which told him several things about how she slept in unfamiliar places. He woke at the deep middle of the night to take his own watch and found her sitting on the way station's top rail with her arms across her knees, looking out at the dark country with the same patient alertness he had seen on the road. She said without turning, "There's nothing moving. The horses have been quiet all night." "I wasn't worried," he said. "You should sleep more." "I've slept enough." He came and sat on the end of the rail, a respectful distance. The night was clear and cold, the stars hammered bright across the dark, and the fire had burned down to coals in the ring. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to look at him. In the dark and the coals light, the scars on her arms had a different quality, not harsh but complex, layered, the record of a long and serious life. "You can ask," she said, which was an honest answer. "The man you put down at the crossing, Goran, what did he actually say to you?" She was quiet for a moment. "He said that I should consider the arrangement more carefully, that I was past the age where I could afford to be selective." A pause. "He said that I had been in too many fights and too many campaigns and the scars showed it, and that I should be grateful a human landholder was willing to overlook what he called the damage." Samuel was quiet. He looked out at the dark country and thought about what she had just told him and did not say the first thing that came to his mind or the second. "Is that why you hit him?" he said. "Or is that why you hit him hard enough to put him down?" Something about her stillness changed. Not softened, sharpened actually, but in the direction of honesty rather than defense. "The second," she said. "He was wrong," Samuel said. He said it the same way he would say the road is wet or the soup needs salt, as a simple factual statement with no particular performance around it. She looked at him. "He was wrong," Samuel said again. "That's all." She said nothing for a long time. The fire coals ticked and settled. A night bird called somewhere in the distance and was answered and then fell silent. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You have no basis for—" "I know enough," he said. "I know what I've seen since this morning. That's a basis." He met her gaze across the dark. "A man who tells a woman her history shows in her body and she should be grateful anyone wants her is a small man with a small mind, and he was wrong. That's not a complicated position." Shagrol Ironhide looked at him for a long moment, and he could not read what was in her expression because the light was too low and she was too careful. Then she turned back to the dark country and said, "Get some sleep, Samuel Whitaker. I'll wake you at first bell." He went inside and lay down on the way station's wooden bunk and stared at the roof for a long time before sleep took him, listening to the quiet dark outside and the small sounds of a woman keeping watch, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, which was the particular warmth of not being entirely alone. The second day on the Varro Road was when they found them. It was late morning, the sun well up and the road dusty from a dry week, when Shagrol pulled her mare up sharp, and Samuel pulled his gelding up beside her and said nothing because she was listening. He had learned in one day to trust when she listened. 3 riders came around the bend ahead of them. Clan Ironhide colors green and iron gray, and the lead rider was a woman about Shagrol's age with a close-shaved head and the expression of someone completing an assignment. "My uncle's second option," Shagrol said very quietly. "How many?" Samuel said. "These 3. There will be 2 more on the East Fork. He anticipated we might go to Varro." She did not reach for a weapon. She sat perfectly still on the mare and watched the riders come to a stop 20 feet ahead of them, and then she said, in the clan tongue, "Rona." The lead rider, Rona, answered in the same language. Samuel did not speak the clan tongue. He had a working grasp of perhaps 40 words, none of them useful in this situation. But he had been in enough tense conversations to read the shape of one without understanding the content, and this one was going in a direction that was going to require a decision from him in roughly 30 seconds. Shagrol said, in the border tongue, very quietly so only he heard it, "She says she has orders to return me to Greywood Crossing, and that the arrangement is to be finalized within 3 days. My uncle has moved the timeline." A pause. "She has been given authority to use whatever force is necessary." What does necessary mean exactly? In this context, it means they won't hurt me, but they will physically remove me from this horse if I don't comply. Another pause, shorter. "I could take all 3 of them, but Rona and I grew up together and I would prefer not to break her arm." "What about my options?" he said. She looked at him then, a quick, searching look as though recalculating. "You could ride east. The Border Council doesn't need you present to file a refusal on your behalf if you submit a written statement, and my uncle's authority over you is limited without the accord in play. You would keep your land claim. That's the option where you go back to Greywood Crossing and get married to whoever your uncle has decided you're marrying." "That is the option," she said. "That's not an option," he said. He turned his horse to face the 3 riders head-on, and he squared his shoulders and he said, in the border tongue that all of them could hear, "I am Samuel Whitaker. I hold the Southern Orchard Grant under the Border Accord, and my travel to Vero to file a refusal before the Border Council is protected under the Accord's passage provisions. Section 12. Anyone who impedes my passage is in breach of treaty law, which is a matter for the Border Council, not the clan elder. If you have a dispute with that, you can file it in Vero." He reached into his coat pocket and produced the copy of the decree he had been carrying since yesterday morning. "I have the documents." He did not actually know if Section 12 said anything of the sort. He had read Section 12 once in the way station last night, while Shagrol was on watch. It was about the transport of goods across the border, not the movement of people. But it was long and dense and written in a version of the border tongue that most people found impenetrable. And he said Section 12, with the perfect confidence of a man who has spent years in situations where confidence was the entire difference. Rona looked at him. She looked at Shagrol. She looked at the document in his hand. Shagrol said something in the clan tongue, in a tone so smooth and reasonable it was almost alarming. Rona looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at Shagrol and said something short and, from the sound of it, resigned. Shagrol said quietly to Samuel, "She says she will give us until day's end tomorrow. After that she will report back to my uncle." "A day and a half is enough to get to Vero," he said. "Yes," Shagrol said. And then, for the first time since he had met her, something in her voice carried a note of something adjacent to relief. Rona and her 2 riders pulled aside and let them through, and Samuel rode past them at a steady pace and did not look back, and Shagrol came up beside him on the road, and they rode in silence for almost a mile before she said, very quietly, "Section 12 is about cargo." "Yes," he said, "you knew that. I read it last night." She was quiet. Then, "That was dangerous." "Slightly," he said. "Did it work?" She looked at him, and this time the not-quite smile became, briefly, something fully formed and genuine, and it changed her whole face, not softened it but opened it, let something through that was usually behind glass. "Yes," she said. "It worked." He found himself grinning, which he had not done in a while. It felt strange and also very good. They reached Vero with 4 hours to spare before nightfall and went directly to the Border Council Hall, which was a low stone building on the main road with the council's green and white banner hung above the door. The clerk on duty was a man named Osric who Samuel had spoken to when he first filed his land claim, and who recognized him with the particular expression of a man who has seen many strange things come through his door, and has been prepared for many, but not necessarily this specific one. They filed the joint refusal. It was 3 pages of paperwork, signed by both of them and witnessed by Osric and a second council member called in from the back room, and Osric stamped it with the council seal and logged it in the record book, and then looked up at them both and said, "This will be binding within 48 hours, when the record is copied and dispatched to the Greywood Crossing witness. At that point the arrangement is formally dissolved and both parties are released from the accord's marital provisions." He paused. "I should note that the clan elder may contest it through the formal petition process, which would take 90 days. "He won't," Shagrol said. "He would have to admit in a formal petition that his interpretation of the kinship provisions was incorrect, and he values his pride more than the River Road Agreement." She said it with the certainty of someone who has known the person in question for her entire life. Osric nodded, carefully. "Then I believe you are both free to go." They walked out of the council hall into the evening light of Varro's main road, and the day's work was done, and Samuel looked up at the sky and felt the particular quiet of something having been concluded. Shagrol stood beside him. She was looking at the road south, the way that led back to the Greywood and the orchard and her own clan's territory, and Samuel looked at the same road and was aware that the reason they had come here had been achieved, and there was now no practical reason for them to be standing next to each other. He did not like that thought at all. "There's a decent tavern on the West End," he said. "Hot food and clean rooms. I've stayed there before." She looked at him sideways. "Are you suggesting we stay the night?" "The road back is 2 days. It's nearly dark. Staying makes sense." He paused. "I could also use a proper meal, and I imagine you could too." She considered this, or appeared to consider it, in the way that he was beginning to recognize meant she had already decided and was deciding whether to let him see that. "All right," she said. The tavern was called the Border Post, and it was exactly as he had described: warm, plain, functional, with a woman behind the bar who fed them without drama, and found them 2 rooms on the upper floor with the incurious efficiency of someone who had been running an establishment on the frontier all her life, and had long since stopped being surprised by the range of people who walked through her door. If she had any particular feelings about a human man and an orc woman coming in together, she kept them entirely to herself, which Samuel appreciated. They ate at a corner table, which Shagrol had selected because it put her back to the wall and gave her sightlines to the door, and Samuel had said nothing about the choice because he had done the same thing himself for 8 years. The food was good roasted meat and root vegetables and a thick grain bread, and Shagrol ate with the same matter-of-fact appreciation she had shown at his kitchen table. Samuel had a cup of the tavern's house ale, which was dark and bitter and excellent, and she had water, which she preferred. "What will you do?" He said. It was not a carefully crafted question. He meant it in the simple sense of what she would do next now that the immediate problem was solved. She looked up from her food. "Return to the Greywood. I have a situation there." "Your uncle." "My uncle," she confirmed. "He is not a bad man. He is a practical man who has made practical decisions and genuinely believes that what is good for the clan is good for its members, including the ones who disagree." She turned her cup of water in her hands, a slow movement. "He and I have disagreed about many things over the past 4 years, since my father died and he took the wardenship." "What kind of things?" She looked at him steadily for a moment as though measuring how much to give. "The clan's direction," she said. "My father built Clan Ironhide through strength of arms and alliance through honesty. My uncle builds through arrangement and leveraged advantage. Both can work. I simply know which I prefer." A pause. "I also know which has kept me spending more time on the road between clan territory and wherever I am not wanted than I would like." "Are you wanted in the clan territory?" he asked carefully. "I am needed," she said. "Which is different. I am Bogdan's daughter and the warriors who served him respect that, but needed is not the same as wanted." She said the last part without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. Samuel looked at his ale. He thought about the orchard and the solitude of it, the particular ache of a life that was good by most measures and still somehow always a little short of warm. He thought about how Shagrol Ironhide had sat across from him in a cold way station and watched the dark country and said, very quietly, he was wrong, as though no one had said that to her in a long time and she did not know what to do with it yet. "You're wanted," he said. She looked at him. "Here," he said, and did not look away. "At the moment. You are wanted at this table by this person having this conversation. That is a small and specific thing, and I know it, but I wanted to say it plainly." Shagrol Ironhide sat very still. Something moved through her expression that she did not quite catch in time, something unguarded and real and slightly shaken. Then she gathered herself and she looked at her plate and she said, "You are a very strange man, Samuel Whitaker." "You've said that," he said. "It continues to be true," she said. But she was almost smiling, and she finished her dinner, and they sat at the corner table for another full hour talking about nothing in particular. The road conditions between Varro and the Greywood, the best method for grafting apple trees, the politics of the border council, a campaign she had been in 3 years ago in the mountain passes north of clan territory that had involved a great deal of snow and a somewhat catastrophic supply situation. She told the supply story with the dry, precise timing of someone who found it funny now, though it had not been funny at the time, and Samuel laughed at the part about the mules, and she looked at him laughing and allowed herself to smile at full strength. And it was, he thought, one of the best evenings he had spent in 2 years. He walked her to her room at the top of the tavern stairs, because the hall was narrow and his room was past hers. At her door she turned and looked at him, and there was a new quality to the look, still that searching, measuring thing, but warmer and more than slightly unsure, which was the most human thing he had seen in her yet. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for not riding east when Rona stopped us. You would have figured something out," he said. "You had contingencies." "I had 2 contingencies," she said. "Neither of them involved someone else standing in the road and inventing treaty law at Rona until she stood down." Something in her voice had gone soft in a way he was not sure she was aware of. "I was not prepared for that." He stood in the narrow hall and looked at her, and the wanting he felt was something he was going to have to be careful with, not because it was wrong, but because it was very large, suddenly. And she was a person he had met yesterday, and he was aware of the obligation not to misread the situation. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He went to his room and lay in the dark and did not sleep for a long time. They rode back the next day and the day after, and on the second morning, with the orchard visible in the distance, they stopped on the road and sat their horses side by side in silence for a moment that they both knew was the edge of something. At the orchard gate she would turn north and he would turn in, and the practical logic of their acquaintance would be over. "You could come in," he said. "Before you ride north. There's cider from last autumn's pressing. It travels well if you wanted to take some back." She looked at the orchard, then at him. "You are not very subtle," she said. "No," he said honestly. She rode in with him. He had been back at the orchard for 3 days when she came back. He was up a ladder in the far corner of the southern block, checking a high branch for the particular kind of leaf blight that had been creeping up from the creek side, when he heard the mare's hooves on the lane and climbed down to find Shagrol Ironhide sitting on her horse at the end of the row with a travel pack on her back, and the look of someone who has come to a decision that cost her something. "My uncle," she said without preamble, "has decided that since the joint refusal filing stands, he will proceed with the River Road negotiation through the Border Council, which is what I wanted. But he has also decided that my presence in clan territory is a complication, since the council will ask me for my account of the arrangement situation, and I will give it honestly." She looked down at him from the horse. "He has encouraged me, quite firmly, to spend some time elsewhere until the negotiations conclude." "He exiled you," Samuel said. "He used the word sabbatical," she said, with immense precision. Samuel wiped his hands on his work trousers and looked up at her. The morning light was full on her face and she was tired. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the slight heaviness around her eyes, but she was here and she was looking at him without hedging, and he understood that coming here had taken something from her, that she had other places she could have gone and had chosen this one. How long, he said. He said until the negotiations conclude. That could be a month. It could be 3. All right, he said. She looked at him. The fence along the north meadow needs repointing before the autumn wet, he said. I haven't had time to start on it. And I've been trying to build a proper drying shed for the apple harvest, but I keep getting the joinery wrong. Shagrol Ironhide dismounted. I am good at joinery, she said. Good, he said. Come inside, there's breakfast left. She stayed. The first week was about finding a rhythm. He was up before dawn with his orchard work. The endless patient labor of pruning and watching and waiting that farming required. And she was up before him, which he only discovered on the 3rd morning when he came out to start the fire, and found it already going and her sitting at the table with a cup of hot water, reading the copy of the border accord she had apparently brought in her pack. You don't have to be up this early, he said. I sleep lightly, she said. I always have. Old campaign habit. Old habit, she said, and did not elaborate. He made their breakfasts, and they worked through the morning in a companionable division that seemed to organize itself without needing to be discussed. He in the orchard, she at whatever project had presented itself. And they came back together at midday and ate, and sometimes talked and sometimes worked beside each other in the afternoon in a silence that had become, very naturally and without ceremony, the most comfortable silence Samuel had experienced in years. She was better at joinery than he was. She had grown up in a clan that built in timber, and she understood wood the way he understood stone, not just mechanically but intuitively, the way material behaves under stress and over time. The drying shed came together in a week and a half, strong and true, and he stood inside it and felt the quality of the construction and said, "This is better than anything I could have done alone." She was on the ladder outside, hammering the last of the roof boards, and she said without stopping, "You would have figured it out eventually." "Not this well," he said. She came down from the ladder and stood in the shed doorway and looked at the space, and he saw in her face the same thing he felt himself, the particular satisfaction of something built right. "My father built," she said, "before he was warchief. He used to build the clan's winter hall additions himself by hand with 2 of his war brothers. He said it kept him honest." What did he mean by that? He meant that you cannot argue with a joint or a beam. If you have built it wrong, it falls. She looked at the shed's interior, the clean lines of the joinery, the way the corner posts sat plumb and true. He was a complicated man, but he built beautifully. Samuel said, "I would have liked to know him." She looked at him with that startled, unguarded quality again, the one she got when he said something she had not prepared herself for. Then she turned and walked out of the shed, and he heard her footsteps on the grass outside, and he gave her a few minutes before he followed, because she needed them. They were at the stone fence on the eastern edge, when the first real thing happened between them. The first thing that was not kindness or practicality or careful conversation, but something more direct and harder to manage. He was repointing the mortar on a section that had crumbled with the previous winter's frost, and she was sitting on the fence top watching, the late afternoon sun warm on her back, and he was telling her about the Thornfield campaign, not the fighting but the time between, the weeks of waiting in the camps that everyone who had not been a soldier forgot about because waiting was not dramatic, and she was listening in the way she had, total and unhurried. And then she reached down and caught his hand where it rested on the fence top, just that. Her hand over his, warm and solid. He went still. She said quietly, "You were very alone." "Yes," he said. He did not move his hand. "For a long time." "Yes." Her thumb moved once across the back of his hand, a single deliberate stroke. He looked up at her on the fence and she looked down at him, and neither of them had any armor on at the moment, and it was the most nakedly honest he had felt in front of another person in years. "So was I," she said. He turned his hand under hers so their palms were together and held on. She let him. They stayed like that for a long time in the late afternoon light while the birds moved in the apple trees, and the creek ran quiet somewhere below the fence line. And it was not a small thing, and neither of them pretended it was. He learned her that month. Not the facts of her, the facts were straightforward enough, though full of history and weight, but the particular shape of how she moved through the world. The way she sharpened her knife every evening, not because it needed it, but because it was a ritual that helped her think. The way she could sit in absolute stillness for an hour watching something, the tree line, a particular section of sky, the way the creek ran over a certain stone, in a mode that was not patience but something more active, a kind of deep attention he found beautiful. The way she laughed, rarely and without warning, and with her whole body, the way things that struck her as genuinely funny seemed to catch her off guard every time, as though she never quite believed delight was coming until it arrived. He learned that she was fiercely competent at nearly everything she tried, and that she found her own competence matter of fact rather than impressive, which made it more impressive. He learned that she was harder on herself than on anyone else, and that she held a standard for her own conduct that would have crushed most people, and that she did this quietly without broadcasting it, because she did not do things for audience. He learned that she had been told, for most of her life, in various ways and by various people, that she was too much too large, too scarred, too fierce, too old in her bearing, too strange to want. He learned this not because she told him directly, but because of the way she flinched subtly when he looked at her with any particular warmth. The way she deflected compliments not with false modesty, but with genuine disbelief. He made a point of not deflecting himself. On the evening of the 16th day, she came back from washing at the creek with her hair loose. She had taken the braid out to wash it properly, and it hung down her back still damp, thick and black as crow feathers, and he was at the hearth stirring the evening pot, and he turned when she came in, and the sight of her stopped him. Just stopped him completely, the way something genuinely beautiful does. She caught him looking, and her chin came up, the old reflexive defense, the preparation for something to fend off, and he just said, "Your hair is beautiful when it's down." The chin came down slightly. He went back to stirring. After a moment she sat down at the table, and he heard her beginning to rebraid her hair, the small sounds of it, and he heard her say, very quietly, "Thank you." "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said, and there was something fragile and real in those two words that made his chest ache. The market in Varro came around on the last day of the month, which was the big seasonal market where both border settlers and clan traders came in from the Greywood and the surrounding country. And Samuel had apples to sell, the early variety from the South Block, which were small and tart, and sold well to the jam makers and the brewers. He loaded the cart and asked Shagrol if she wanted to come. She was quiet for a moment. "There will be people who know me," she said. "From the clan side, they may ask questions about my being here." "You can tell them the truth," he said. "You're helping with the orchard while the negotiations run. Some of them will make assumptions." "They can assume whatever they want," he said. "Do you want to come?" She looked at him, and then she said yes. The market was loud and full and colorful with the particular energy of a seasonal gathering. People who had been isolated at their own homesteads for weeks coming together, and overflowing with the need to talk and trade and argue, and occasionally fight about something minor. Samuel had a stall at the south end by habit, under an oak tree, and he and Shagrol unloaded the apple crates and set up the table, and she stood at his side while he sold, and she was exactly what he imagined she might be in a crowd, very still, very watchful, letting the business proceed around her without inserting herself into it. 3 humans from the far south settler families looked at her and walked past the stall without stopping, which they would normally have done to buy apples. Samuel watched this happen and did not say anything, and sold his apples to everyone else with perfect friendliness. A clan trader he recognized, a man named Dresh who traded in furs, came by and spoke to Shagrol at length in the clan tongue with many glances at Samuel, and Shagrol answered him in the border tongue, which forced the conversation into a language Samuel could follow, and which was, he realized, deliberate. She was not excluding him from the conversation. She was including him. They were packing up the last crates in the late afternoon when a man came to the stall who Samuel had not seen at Varro Market before. He was a large man, broad through the neck, wearing the kind of new clothes that said he had money but was not used to having it. He looked at the remaining apples and then looked at Shagrol and said, with the flat confidence of someone who had never been checked in his life, "What's the orc doing behind your stall? You let them work for you now." Samuel set down the crate he was holding. He straightened up. He was not as large as this man, and he was carrying a knife, not a sword, and none of that mattered at the moment. "She's not working for me," he said, very pleasantly. "She's helping me pack up, the same way you might if you were here with a friend." He looked at the man without any particular heat, just steadily, the way you look at something you've noticed and are taking seriously. Was there something else? The man looked between Samuel and Shagrol. Shagrol had turned and was looking at him with the same composed, flat expression she had given Goran at Greywood Crossing, which should have been, Samuel thought, a fairly serious warning. "Didn't mean anything by it," the man said in the tone of someone who clearly had. "That's fine," Samuel said. He picked up the crate again. "Good evening." The man walked away. Shagrol watched him go and then turned and helped Samuel lift the last crate into the cart and said nothing for a moment and then said, "You didn't need to do that." "I know," he said. He climbed onto the cart and picked up the reins. "Did you want me not to?" She climbed up beside him. They were sitting close on the narrow cart bench, her shoulder against his. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "No, I did not want you not to." He clicked the horse forward, and she was warm at his side, and the evening light was gold on the road. He kissed her for the first time on the 23rd day, which he had not planned. He had been on the roof of the drying shed checking a seam that he suspected was going to let in water, and he had been right, and she had handed tools up to him, and then climbed up herself to have a look, because she was incapable of being near a problem without examining it. They had been on the roof in the warm, late morning air, shoulder to shoulder, both of them looking at the same seam, and she had turned to say something about the pitch of the roof line, and he had turned at the same moment, and they were very close, and he had, without planning it and without exactly being surprised by it, looked at her for one clear moment and then closed the distance. She was still for a half-second, and then she was not still at all. She kissed him back with the focused, undivided intensity that she brought to everything, and it was nothing like the shy, tentative thing he had been half expecting. It was direct and warm and deeply intentional, and when they separated, she put one hand against the side of his jaw and held it there and looked at him with an expression that was stripped of every defense and simply said, in the plainest terms, "There you are." "I've been wanting to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I have been deciding whether to do it myself for 2 weeks. "You should have," he said. "You were faster," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice, and she kept her hand against his jaw for another moment before she turned back to the roof seam and said, "The pitch needs to come up by 2 degrees on the south face." He laughed, sudden and bright. She smiled, full and open, and they fixed the roof seam together, and it was the best day he had had in longer than he could calculate. After that, things moved differently. Not faster in any rushed sense, but more honestly. They were not being careful with each other anymore, or rather they were careful in a different way, the way you are careful with something you know is real. She reached for his hand when they were walking and he let her, and when she was at the workbench in the evenings and he brought her tea, she looked up at him in a way that meant something, and when they talked past midnight at the kitchen table neither of them pretended they were talking to be practical. She told him, piece by piece, the parts of her history she had not volunteered before. The years after her father died when the clan had been unsettled, and she had spent most of her time on the road, taking border work, contract scouting and escort. Essentially, the same sellsword life he had lived. though she had not thought of it that way because it was the work available and she was very good at it. The 3 arrangement proposals from her uncle, each one to a man who had looked at her the way you look at an asset, and the way she had refused each one, and the way each refusal had cost her something in the clan's regard, even though she had been right to refuse. The way she had learned over time to need less from other people, to keep herself sufficient, to not let herself want things that the world seemed disinclined to give her. Things like what, he said. She was sitting across the kitchen table from him, the late fire making the room amber and warm, and she looked at him for a moment and then looked at her hands. Ordinary things, she said. A place I was glad to come back to. Someone who was glad when I came back. He stood up and came around the table and she looked up at him, and he leaned down and kissed her temple, which was not a grand gesture but was the one that fit the moment. And she leaned her head briefly against his shoulder, and they stayed like that for a little while, and it was the kind of quiet that was also a kind of fullness. The message from Greywood Crossing came on the 31st day, carried by a clan runner who knocked at the orchard gate at sunrise with the look of someone who had been riding hard. Shagrol read it at the kitchen table with Samuel making breakfast behind her, and when she set it down her expression was complicated. "The negotiations have concluded," she said. "My uncle has an agreement with the border council for the river road. It came together faster than expected." She turned the paper in her hands. "He wants me to return." Samuel set down the pan. He turned. "When?" "He's given me 3 days." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, the birds were starting in the apple trees. "And if you don't go back," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I am Bogdan Ironhide's daughter," she said. "The clan is my home. The warriors who served my father, they are my people. I cannot simply leave because it is easier." She said it without apology, because it was true, and she had never been someone who apologized for true things. "My uncle's politics and I will always be at odds, but abandoning the clan over it is not something I can do." "I'm not asking you to," he said. She looked at him. "I'm asking you to take the 3 days," he said, "and I'm asking you to come back." She was quiet for a long moment. "You would want that," she said carefully. "You would want me coming back, traveling between the clan territory and here. It would be complicated. My uncle will find a way to use it as leverage. The clan will talk. People in Varro will talk. Let them," he said. He came and sat across from her at the table. "I don't care about complicated. I care about whether you want to come back." "You know I want to," she said very quietly, as though saying it at full voice might break something. "Then come back," he said. "We'll figure out the complicated." She stood, and she crossed the small kitchen, and she took his face in both her hands the way she had on the shed roof and looked at him for a long, close moment, and then she kissed him with a thoroughness that left no ambiguity whatsoever about what she wanted, and when she pulled back she said, against his mouth, "I will come back in 7 days. If I am delayed it will be my uncle's doing and not mine." "I know," he said. She went, and he stood in the orchard gate and watched her ride north into the Greywood, and he went back to his trees. She came back in 6 days, which he chose to count as a victory. She came back with her full pack and the black mare and something different in how she carried herself, not lighter but more settled, as though she had resolved something. She told him about the 6 days at the clan camp as they walked the south block together in the evening, checking the late varieties that were beginning to come in. She had spoken to the clan warriors who had served her father, and they had been glad to see her. She had spoken to her uncle at length in his tent, and it had been the most honest conversation they had had in 4 years. She had told him that she was not his to arrange, that she would choose her own way, and that she would continue to be Bogdan's daughter and a member of Clan Ironhide, but on her own terms. "How did he take it?" Samuel said. "He was angry for about an hour," she said. "Then he was tired. Then he said something about the River Road agreement, and I said something about being glad it was concluded, and we had dinner, and it was the most civil we have been with each other since my father died." She paused, turning a ripening apple in her hand. "He is not a bad man. I meant that before. He genuinely does not know how to want something for me that has no practical benefit for the clan, but I think he is beginning to understand that I will not be managed." "Good," Samuel said. She set the apple back on its branch carefully. "He also asked about you," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were the most honest man I had met since my father." She said it simply, the way she said anything true. He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before she noticed and turned back to look at him. "That is a significant thing to say," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am aware." He crossed the 2 steps between them, and she met him in the middle, and he held her. There in the orchard row in the evening light, with the apple trees all around them and the sound of the creek somewhere below. And her arms came around him with a strength that was neither restrained nor careless. And she pressed her face against the side of his neck and breathed him in. And he felt, with a clarity that was almost startling, that this was the particular warmth he had been circling toward his entire life, without knowing what he was looking for. The trouble came in the form of 2 men from the South settler families, the ones who had walked past his stall at market, and they came to the orchard on a gray morning 3 weeks after Shagrol had come back. Samuel saw them coming up the lane from the gate and put down his pruning shears and walked to meet them, because he knew what the visit was about, and he was not going to let them get further into his property than necessary. Shagrol was at the drying shed on the far side of the orchard and could not see the lane from there, which was fine, because he was going to handle this himself. The 2 men were named Croft and Yates, and they were the kind of men who had been large and certain their whole lives and had decided somewhere along the way that this meant something. Croft did the talking. "We've been hearing things, Whitaker," he said, "about you keeping an orc woman on your property." "She's helping with the orchard," Samuel said, which was true and also none of their business. "For a month," Croft said, "going on 2. The harvest is in 4 weeks," Samuel said. "I can use the help." "People are talking," Croft said. "Decent settlers, people who have been on this frontier for 20 years. They're saying you've gone soft on orc business, letting them onto your land, treating them like they belong here." "She does belong here," Samuel said pleasantly. "She's here, isn't she?" Croft looked at him with the particular displeasure of someone who has prepared for an argument and found the other person not frightened enough to perform the scene correctly. "The Border Council isn't going to look kindly on settlers who mix with the clans like this," he said. "There are people who think the accord gives them too much ground already." "The accord," Samuel said, "is what keeps people like you and me from having another Thornfield." He looked at Croft without raising his voice or his hands. "I fought at Thornfield, 3 days of it. I know what the alternative to the accord looks like, and I would prefer not to see it again." He let a moment pass. "Is there something specific you wanted from me, or did you ride out here to tell me what people are saying?" Croft looked at Yates. Yates looked at the ground. "We're just saying," Croft said, "that you might want to reconsider your situation before it becomes more of a problem." "I appreciate the counsel," Samuel said, in a tone that conveyed the precise opposite. "Good morning." They left. Samuel stood at the top of the lane and watched them go, and then turned to find Shagrol standing at the corner of the south block, 10 feet away, arms crossed, expression containing multitudes. "I came around the back way when I saw them on the lane," she said. "I figured," he said. "You handled it well," she said. "I've had practice with that type," he said. He went and picked up his pruning shears. "Don't worry about them." She looked at him for a long moment, that measuring, searching look. "They will make more trouble," she said. "Men like that always do." "Probably," he said. "Let them try." But it was the following month that the real trouble arrived, and it arrived not from Croft and Yates, but from something none of them had anticipated. The message came from within Clan Ironhide itself, from the younger faction, the warriors who were not bound by her uncle's more cautious politics, who had decided among themselves that the warchief's daughter had been allowed to drift too far, and that the human who was keeping her on his land was an insult that required addressing. 3 of them rode to the orchard at midday on a Friday, armed, and the one at the front was a young man named Breck, who Samuel recognized from the Greywood crossing crowd, the sort who had been watching everything that day with the specific expression of someone waiting for an opportunity. Shagrol came out of the orchard shed when she heard the horses and stood in the yard between Samuel and the three riders, and Samuel noted that she had placed herself in front of him, just slightly, which he understood and did not argue with at the moment because the three of them were armed and his sword was inside, and she was more immediately dangerous than he was. Breck spoke in the clan tongue. Shagrol answered in the border tongue, which was becoming, he realized, their shared signal, including him refusing to leave him behind. Breck switched languages with visible irritation. The warchief's daughter should not be living with a human, Breck said. It is a disgrace to your father's name. My father's name, Shagrol said very quietly, was built by 30 years of honest service to the clan. He chose his companions and his alliances based on who was worthy, not on what clan crest they wore. Her voice did not rise, it did not need to. You did not know my father, I did, do not speak to me about his name. The clan talks, Breck said. Let them, she said. I have spent my life in service to this clan. I have fought in 4 campaigns, 3 of them at my own initiative. I have held the Eastern Passage twice against raider bands when there was no one else available to hold it. She took 1 step forward. She was taller than Breck by half a head and she stood very straight. If someone in the clan wishes to challenge my choices, they may challenge them formally, in front of the whole clan, as the old customs allow. I will answer any formal challenge. But 3 riders showing up at a man's orchard at midday to deliver threats is not a formal challenge. It is an embarrassment. Breck's jaw tightened. The clan requires its warchief's daughter to be present at the Harvest Moon gathering, she said, cutting him off cleanly. I will answer for my choices before the whole clan, as I said. She held his gaze without blinking. Now get off this man's land. There was a long, taut moment. Then Breck turned his horse and the other 2 turned with him and they rode back down the lane, and Samuel waited until they were gone before he let out the breath he had been holding. Formal challenge, he said. What does that mean, exactly? She turned to look at him. In the old custom, a formal challenge to a clan member's conduct is settled by combat. The challenger fights the one being challenged or nominates a champion and the winner's position is upheld. Samuel looked at her for a moment. And you've done this before. 3 times, she said. He looked at the road the riders had taken. Then he looked back at her. I'll be there, he said. At the Harvest Moon gathering. If that's where you're answering for your choices, I'm answering too. She looked at him with something that might, in a different light, have been called awe. Samuel, you placed yourself in front of me just now, he said. Without being asked, because it was right, he met her gaze. I can do the same. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she crossed the yard and put both arms around him and pressed her face into his neck and said, very quietly, into his skin, I have never had someone say that to me. He held her in the orchard yard in the midday sun and said, You have it now. The Harvest Moon gathering of Clan Ironhide was held in the great clearing south of the clan's main camp, ringed by torches on iron posts, with the whole clan in attendance and a scattering of border witness members, as was custom at formal events. Samuel rode with Shagrol along the Greywood road at dusk, the harvest moon enormous and amber on the eastern horizon, and the light through the trees was the color of old bronze. He had worn his good clothes, clean dark trousers, the gray coat he kept for Varro market days, his boots polished. He had also, for the first time in 2 years, buckled on his sword, because he was going into a large gathering of armed people, and because Shagrol had not said don't, which he took as meaningful. She was in her warrior's leathers, green and brown and close-fitted, the iron buckles on her boots catching the torchlight, the iron ring in her braid, and she looked precisely like what she was, a warchief's daughter coming home on her own terms. Her uncle met them at the edge of the clearing. He was a heavy-set orc man in his late 50s with the same dark eyes as Shagrol and a posture of practiced authority, and he looked at Samuel with the careful assessment of someone who has been told a great deal about a person and is now forming his own opinion. Shagrol said, in the border tongue, Uncle, this is Samuel Whitaker. You know who he is. Her uncle looked at Samuel for a long moment. Then he said in the border tongue, "You are smaller than I expected." "I hear that sometimes," Samuel said. Something moved in the man's face, not a smile but a recognition. He looked at Shagrol. "Breck has filed a formal challenge," he said. "He has named a champion, a man called Ergen." Samuel had not heard of Ergen, but the way the uncle said the name told him what he needed to know. This was someone significant. Shagrol said nothing. Her expression was the composed, flat thing she wore when she was calculating. "Ergen is the strongest fighter in the northern reaches," the uncle said. "Breck found him specifically. He is not a clan member. He is a hired champion." He looked at his niece with the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered by his own clan politics and does not enjoy it. "I cannot void the challenge. It was filed correctly." "I know," Shagrol said. "I will fight him." Samuel said, "Can a champion be named on your side as well?" Both of them looked at him. "In the old custom," he said. He had asked Shagrol about this on the road specifically, and she had explained the full procedure. "The challenged party may fight directly or may name a champion of their own choosing. Is that correct?" "It is correct," the uncle said slowly. Samuel looked at Shagrol. She was looking at him with an expression he could not fully read, full of things she had not said yet. "Name me," he said. She was quiet for a long moment. "You were a sellsword," she said. "For 8 years," he said. "I haven't swung a blade in 2 years, but the knowledge doesn't leave." He held her gaze. "Name me." "Ergen is twice your weight," she said. "He is a professional hired champion. He has not lost a formal challenge in 6 years." "I know," he said. She looked at him, and the torchlight was full on her face, and he could see everything she felt, the fear for him, which she did not dress up as anything other than what it was, and underneath it, something that was both older and stronger, the fierce and particular thing that had been growing between them since the road to Varro and the way station and the fence in the late afternoon light. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I can fight him." "I know you can fight him," he said. "You could drop him like you dropped Goran. But if you fight him and win, you've proved that you can handle your own challenges. That's what you've always had to prove." He kept his voice quiet just for her. "If I stand for you, I'm saying something different. I'm saying you're not alone in this. That's what I want to say." She looked at him for a long time. The clearing was filling with people, the torches blazing, the harvest moon riding high and amber above the trees. Then she said to her uncle, "I name Samuel Whitaker as my champion." The crowd that had gathered at the edges of the clearing made a sound, not outrage exactly, but a deep, collective murmur of surprise, because a human champion was not something that happened in the old custom, or if it had happened, it had been long enough ago that no one living could recall it. Samuel heard it and ignored it and turned to face the center of the clearing. Ergen was already there. He was, Samuel noted, extremely large. He was maybe 6'4", heavy through the shoulders and chest, with the particular economy of movement of someone who had been in a great deal of actual combat. No wasted energy, no performance, just the flat readiness of a professional. He held a short-hafted iron mace in his right hand, and looked at Samuel with no particular expression, which was somehow more concerning than if he had looked contemptuous. The clan elder, not Shagrol's uncle, but the oldest council member, a small ancient woman who moved with the authority of a person who has outlasted every person who ever argued with her, stepped to the center and stated the terms. Single combat. First to yield or fall. No weapons on Samuel's side, Shagrol had told him, was the rule when a challenged party named a champion not of the clan. But she had also told him that a sword qualified for the formal engagement, so he drew it, and felt the familiar weight of it settle into his hand, and took a breath. He had not done this in 2 years. He had not done it before a crowd of several hundred people, with a woman behind him who held his heart in her hands ever, not once, and the knowledge of her watching was both the most frightening and the most steadying thing he had ever felt. Ergen came forward, and the first exchange was fast and brutal, and Samuel took a hit on his guard arm that he was going to feel for a week, because Ergen was stronger than anyone he had fought before, and the mace had a force to it that buzzed up the bones of his arm even through the block. But Samuel was fast. He had always been fast. It was the thing that had kept him alive for 8 years in a trade that killed most of its practitioners. And he had a weapon with reach, and he knew how to make space when he needed it. They went around the clearing twice in 2 minutes, and the crowd was absolutely silent in a way that crowds rarely were. And Samuel was thinking about nothing except the small, precise geometry of the fight, where his feet were, where the mace was, where the openings were, the half-second windows that were the whole vocabulary of a serious exchange. Ergen caught him with a shoulder hit that put him on one knee, and the crowd roared, and Samuel heard from very close behind him, in a low and fierce voice that cut right through the crowd noise, Shagrol saying his name, just that, just Samuel, in the voice of a person whose composure has broken exactly enough to let one true thing through. He got up. Ergen came in hard, and Samuel stepped inside the arc of the mace swing, which was the dangerous place, but also the only place where Ergen's reach advantage disappeared, and he put his elbow into Ergen's face and his foot behind Ergen's heel in the same half-second, the way you learned to do it when you were lighter than the other man and had to be faster, and Ergen went down. Heavily, concussively, the way large men go down when they go down wrong. The clearing went silent. Samuel stood over him, breathing hard, his arm aching from the first hit, and Ergen did not immediately move. The ancient councilwoman moved to the center and looked at Ergen for a long moment. Then she said in the clan tongue something short and declarative. Shagrol was at Samuel's side in the next breath. He felt her before he saw her, the warm, solid presence of her, and then her hands were on his face the way they always were when she wanted him to look at her, and he looked at her, and she was full of something enormous that she had not yet found the words for. "You got up," she said. "I heard you," he said. She made a sound he had never heard from her, small and completely unguarded, and pulled him in and held him against her with both arms, there in the center of the clan clearing with a few hundred people watching, and he held her back, and the crowd made a different sound now, something that moved through the assembly like a wave. Her uncle came and stood beside them. He looked at Samuel over Shagrol's shoulder, and Samuel met his gaze, and after a moment the uncle said very quietly, "My brother would have liked you." Samuel said, "I hope so." Breck did not speak. Breck, it turned out, had considerably less to say now that his hired champion was sitting in the dirt. The councilwoman, the ancient elder, came to stand before them. She said something in the clan tongue. Shagrol translated quietly against Samuel's temple. She says that the challenge was answered fully, and the challenged party's position stands. And then she said something that she does not officially have the authority to say, which is that in 60 years of clan councils she has never seen a human stand a formal challenge for an orc woman's honor, and that she finds it admirable. A pause. She also said that I could do worse. "Can you tell her I agree with her assessment?" he said. He felt Shagrol's breath against his cheek, the warm exhale that was almost a laugh. There was a feast after, as there was always a feast at the harvest moon gathering, and Samuel sat at the fire among clan members who were not entirely sure what to make of him, but who had just watched him get up from a serious knock to fight a professional champion, which in the Ironhide clan was the kind of currency that required no translation. People brought him food and filled his cup and spoke to him in the clan tongue, and he understood roughly a third of it, and Shagrol translated the rest in a low, continuous voice at his ear that he was not sure she realized had become the most intimate thing she did, this easy inclusion, this refusal to let him be foreign. He watched her at the fire, talking to her uncle, and then to the warriors who had served her father, and he saw the ease that came into her body in this space, complicated, yes, and not without history, but also hers in a way nothing else was. He understood that she would always be partly here, and he found he was glad of it, that he would not want her to cut this off, that the version of her that existed in this firelight was something he wanted to know for the rest of his life. Late at night, when the feast had quieted and most people had found their tents, they walked to the edge of the clearing where the old trees began and stood in the dark at the threshold of the forest, the harvest moon now white and high overhead. Shagrol stood beside him and looked at the trees, and then she said in a voice that was very quiet and very serious, "I want to tell you something and I want to say it correctly." "Take your time," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then I have never in my life allowed myself to need someone. My father was gone before I was finished learning from him. The clan arrangements were all calculated. The road work was solitary. I built myself into something that did not need anyone because needing someone was the same as giving them a weapon to use against you." She turned to look at him. "I need you, and it does not feel like a weapon. I do not know what to do with that." He said, "You don't have to do anything with it. You just have to let it be." She looked at him for a long moment in the white moonlight, and he saw the scars on her arms in that light, all of them. The layered silvery lines of a life lived hard and honestly and close to danger. And he thought about what Goran had said to her, that she was damaged, that she should be grateful, and he thought about how wrong a person could be. He reached out and took her arm gently, palm up, her wrist in his hand, and turned it to look at the inside of her forearm where a long pale scar ran from her wrist to her elbow. He brought it up and pressed his lips to it, there in the moonlight, a slow and deliberate and entirely honest kiss. She made a sound, small and sudden, as though it had surprised her before she could stop it. He held her arm and looked up at her. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on anyone, stripped of everything but truth. Her eyes were bright and her jaw was tight, and she sat down, actually sat, dropping to the grass at the forest's edge in one abrupt motion as though her legs had simply decided, and he went with her, still holding her arm, and they were at the same level, and she was looking at him with something that was part disbelief and part recognition, the way you look at a thing you have wanted so long you stopped believing you would have it. "I have too many scars," she said. "I have always been told you have been told wrong," he said, "by small people with small minds." He kept her wrist in his hand and looked at her. "These are yours. They are part of how you got here. They are part of how you became the person sitting next to me, and that person is the most remarkable person I have known in my life." He held her gaze. "I am not looking past them. I'm looking at them. I see them. I want them. I want everything they're part of." Shagrol Ironhide sat in the grass at the edge of the old forest and breathed and looked at him. And then she reached out with her free hand and took hold of the front of his coat and pulled him in. And she kissed him with the full weight of everything she had been holding back, and it was nothing like being careful. It was thorough and absolute, and it made his head swim, and when they came apart she pressed her forehead to his and they breathed the same air for a long moment. "I choose you," she said, against his mouth. "I want to say it plainly because I know you need to hear it plainly. I choose you. Not the orchard, not the treaty business, not some practical reason. You, Samuel Whitaker. This specific, strange, difficult, extraordinary man who invented treaty language in the road and got up twice and kissed the scar on my arm in the dark." Her voice was rough with feeling and she did not try to smooth it. "I choose you. I choose you," he said back. It was not planned and it was exactly right. Shagrol Ironhide, who had everything figured out and came back to the orchard anyway, who holds a standard for herself that would break most people and never complains about it, who puts her hand along the stone fence to learn it and includes me in every conversation because she does not want me to be a stranger. He touched her face. "I choose you." She closed her eyes. He felt her exhale against him, long and full and slow, as though she had been holding it for years. They came back to the orchard the next morning, both of them, on the road south through the Greywood, and the light through the trees was the same broken green gold as the day they had first ridden it together, which felt like it had been much longer ago than it was. The harvest was beginning in the southern block, the first of the main variety coming in red and heavy, and it needed both of them. The weeks that followed were the best of Samuel's life. He did not think of this in sentimental terms but in concrete ones. He was happy, specifically and daily, in a way that was not the absence of trouble but the presence of something genuine. There was plenty of trouble. The Croft and Yates situation required a formal letter to the Border Council that he wrote with Shagrol reading over his shoulder and suggesting corrections, which she did with a precision that improved the letter considerably. Her uncle came twice to the orchard, which surprised Samuel the first time and did not surprise him the second, and the conversations were not easy, but they were honest, which was what she had always wanted from him. The clan itself settled into a complicated acceptance. Not everyone was pleased, but no one filed another formal challenge, partly because of what they had seen at the harvest moon, and partly because Breck had quietly relocated to the northern reaches, which removed the primary engine of dissent. Shagrol moved between the orchard and the clan camp as she needed, and she always came back. He had known she would because she had said so, and she was not someone who said things she did not mean. But knowing and feeling were different things, and every time he heard the black mare on the lane and saw her ride through the gate in the afternoon light, something in him that had been braced released, and he went to meet her at the paddock fence, and she dismounted and handed him the reins and looked at him with an expression that said the same thing every time without words. I am here. I came back. In the late autumn, with the harvest done and the trees bare and the first cold nights settling over the orchard, they were sitting at the kitchen table late in the evening, the fire low, and she said, "I want to tell you something about Orc custom." "All right," he said. "In the old custom," she said, "when a warrior chooses a permanent companion, there is a threshold vow. You stand in the doorway of your home, the threshold, the place between what is yours and what is the world, and you say it there, where both can see you. It is not a ceremony. There is no clan approval needed, no elder to sanction it. It is just two people speaking true in a doorway." She was looking at her hands on the table. "It is considered the most binding of all the Orc customs because it is made alone, without audience, without politics." She looked up at him. "It is what my father and mother did, before everything, when there was nothing to gain from it except each other." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you say?" "In the threshold vow," she looked at him steadily, "you say what you choose. There are no formal words, just what is true." He stood up. He reached down and took her hand, and she looked up at him with that searching, clear gaze, and he drew her to her feet, and they walked to the front door of the orchard house together, and he opened the door so the cold night came in and the threshold was between them and the dark. He stood there for a moment, in the doorway of the house he had built, with the orchard behind him in the dark, and the woman beside him who had come back 6 times and would come back again. "I was alone for a long time," he said, "and I had made my peace with it, I thought. I had my trees and my work, and I had told myself it was enough." He looked at her. "It wasn't enough. And then you were at the crossing and you said, 'I have not agreed to this,' and something in me recognized you immediately in a way I couldn't account for. Every day since then I have been glad, every single day." He held her hand. "I choose you, Shagrol Ironhide. I choose you for every complicated, difficult, extraordinary reason you exist. I choose you for the threshold and the orchard and the road between here and the Greywood and every road after that. I am yours if you will have me." She stood in the doorway, and the cold air moved around them, and the harvest moon was long past, but there were other stars, ordinary stars, the common brilliant stars of a clear winter night, and she looked at him in their light with everything she felt laid open and undefended. "I choose you, Samuel Whitaker," she said. Her voice was low and steady and full to the edge with something she was no longer trying to contain. "For the stone fence and the drying shed and the way you never looked away. For the road where you stood between me and 3 riders with nothing but a document you had read once. For the clearing where you got up a second time and I heard myself say your name out loud in a crowd and understood what it meant." She pressed her free hand flat against his chest, over his heart. "I am yours. I have been yours since the way station, and I am done pretending otherwise." He kissed her there in the threshold of the orchard house, with the winter night behind them and the warm fire of their home before them, and it was not a gentle kiss. It was acclaiming, thorough and certain, and she answered it in kind, her hand fisting in the front of his coat, and when they finally came apart he rested his forehead against hers and they stood in the threshold and breathed together in the cold. "Come inside," he said. "Yes," she said. He pulled her across the threshold and she came, and the door closed against the winter dark, and the fire was warm and the house was theirs. And outside in the orchard the bare trees stood in their rows under the winter stars, patient and rooted, waiting for spring. Winter settled over the orchard in the way that winters do on the frontier, not dramatically but thoroughly, the cold coming in layer by layer until the world was simple and still and white. They kept the fire banked through the night and rose with the gray dawns and worked the cold morning tasks, bringing in wood, checking the tree roots for frost heave, mending things that needed mending in the long, quiet hours the fallow season provided. It was a different life from the campaign road or the border work, and Shagrol settled into it with the same focused attention she brought to everything, learning the rhythms of it, finding her place in it. She started teaching him the clan tongue in the evenings, methodically, beginning with the verbs she said you needed most and building from there. He was a competent student but not a gifted one, and she was patient with him in a way that was also honest. She did not pretend he was better than he was, but she did not let him give up when he found a conjugation difficult. He repaid this by teaching her every apple variety he grew by their proper names, and the particular reasons each one was worth growing, which she received with the same systematic thoroughness with which she approached everything, memorizing the names without being asked, relating each variety back to its best use. It was the smallest kind of exchange, this mutual teaching, and it was also the most intimate thing. Learning how someone thinks is more revealing than almost anything else you can do with them. Her uncle came in the deep of winter, with the news that the River Road negotiation had been fully ratified and signed by both the Border Council and the clan elder. He sat at their kitchen table and drank Samuel's cider and looked around the kitchen with the expression of a man revising his own previous assessments, and when he left he gripped Samuel's hand at the door with a pressure that was not quite comfortable but was entirely genuine and said, in the border tongue, "Take care of her." Samuel said, "I will. She also takes considerable care of herself." The uncle looked at him. Then he said, "Yes, she does," in a tone that sounded like he was hearing it for the first time and believed it. The spring came in late, as it sometimes did on the frontier, reluctant, the cold hanging on until the apple blossoms could stand it no longer and burst through anyway, pink and white and furious, the way they always did. Samuel walked the orchard in the first real spring morning with Shagrol beside him, and the trees were loud with bees, and the air was full of the apple smell that he had spent 2 years building toward and had now learned to share with someone, which made it better rather than less. She stopped at the edge of the lower meadow where he had planted the 50 new saplings 2 years ago. They were real trees now, no longer saplings, coming into their third spring with confidence. She stood and looked at them and he stood beside her. "These will be a full orchard in another 10 years, she said. "Yes," he said. "You won't be able to manage them alone," she said. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a question. "Even with Aldrich helping. A full orchard of this size is more than 2 people on a seasonal basis." "I know," he said. She turned and looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. It was not a question either. It was a statement of fact, the same clean certainty she brought to anything she had decided. "I know," he said. "I want to be clear about it," she said, "because I know there are people who think this is temporary. The clan gossip, the border settlers. I want you to know that it is not." She held his gaze. "This is my home. You are my home. That is not going to change because it is complicated or because my uncle has opinions or because small men in new clothes say things in the market road." He looked at her in the morning light, in the orchard they were building together, with the spring air full of blossom and the bees working the new trees, and he thought about how lonely he had been for so long and how he had not known the full shape of it until she had filled it. "I know," he said for the third time and took her hand. She squeezed it once, firm and sure. Then she said, "You have 4 trees in the second row with frost damage to the root collar. You should address that before the heat comes." "I saw them yesterday," he said. "I was going to start after breakfast." "I'll help," she said. They went to work together in the spring morning, and the orchard grew around them, and the world was large and still full of difficult things. But it was also full of this. The two of them in a row of apple trees in the morning light, working towards something that was theirs, chosen and real and warm as a fire kept carefully through the winter. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.